Coming up, the New York Football Giants give you the flattest performance arguably in franchise history, opening up the season on Sunday Night Football at home with a debilitating 40-0 loss at the hands of division rival Dallas Cowboys. We break down the disappointment coming up next. Yes, my friends, it is OGP, the One Giant Podcast, where, of course, I'm your host, Adam Armbrecht, being joined by Andrew Makowitz tomorrow when we'll talk more big picture about how the Giants correct what was a disgusting loss to kick off their season. But for today, we're going to stay focused in on the offensive line play, Evan Neal specifically, but also some of, I think, the issues that potentially were being covered up throughout this game because of that glaring problem in front of Daniel Jones. And we'll even touch on Daniel Jones as well. But this really was, we were going to come in and do a post-game podcast right after this one. There's not a lot. We heard Brian Daboll in the post-game press conference. It's on him. It's on the coaches. It's on the players. But you're going to turn the page. You're going to move on. Obviously, he stood up for the players in terms of effort. Was there any sense that people were giving up on this game? No, not concerned about that. But ultimately, it was as bad of a performance as you could put forth to kick off the season, especially with expectations. Remember, Andy and I came in and we talked about, I thought, and Andy maybe a little bit higher in terms of the ceiling, but we both thought, the floor, hard floor of 8 wins for this team. Ceiling, talking about maybe for me 10 wins and then predicting a 9-8 record. It's really hard. It's really hard to look at a performance like this and not feel like there is bleed over going forward in this season. Maybe we'll come out and we'll preview later in the week the Cardinals and what that means and going on the road, staying out there for the 49ers the following week, obviously. But when a game like this happens, it does feel like it has more than just one in the loss column for the New York Football Giants. They fall 40-0 in this one to the Dallas Cowboys, and it really started from Series 1, which looked like it was going pretty good for the Giants, at least to start things off. They get all the way down coming off of that quarter one. And it really felt like it started what could have been positively, but by the end of the first drive, it was an absolute disaster, right? The Giants start from their 25. And I just want to note here that this is how this opening drive went, because somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember that this actually was a good start to the game for the New York Football Giants. It was a run to the left side, 4 or 5 yards, the left side, make a note of that. It was Jones scrambling to the 38 for an 8-yard gain. It was a short pass to Barkley to the right this time, to the Dallas 47. Second down, there's no gain on that play. 9-yard pickup, Barkley to the right side off tackle. Barkley, right end to Dallas, 33-yard line, on a 5-yard gain. You're down to 33. Shotgun, Breida off the right guard to Dallas 27 on a 6-yard gain. 2nd and 4, Jones scrambles, 11-yard pickup, first down, right? All the way down they go. The third now on the final 5 plays before you end up going for the field goal here. 1st and 10 from the 16, Barkley up the middle, no gain. 2nd and 10 from the 16, Jones scrambles for an 8-yard gain. 3rd and 2, and it's a penalty actually on Andrew Thomas. Unfortunately for the false start, it cost them 5 yards. 3rd and 7, Daniel Jones aborts this one here. It's a fumble at the 18, but it's recovered by Daniel Jones. And then the 4th and 21, blocked field goal attempt from Graham Gano, which would mark then his one of 2 missed field goals. It goes down as a miss despite it being blocked and goes the other way for a touchdown for Dallas. So the Giants, and then a missed extra point, 6-0. They had the opening drive down 6-0, and everything from there was an unmitigated disaster. The offensive line started leaking like a sieve. They could not figure anything out. And in spite of the fact that really the Dallas offense wasn't doing much, again, You get the 6 points off that field goal. You get the terrible interception by Daniel Jones later in the game that results in a very short field that leads to a score. It's 26-0 at halftime. We know the game is over, but it doesn't get any better in the third and fourth quarter, ultimately resulting in Daniel Jones staying out there for extended amount of time and getting his butt just absolutely handed to him. So a couple of things to talk about. Offensive line centric. Pass block win rates for the Giants versus the Cowboys. Rate plus ranking as posted by Jordan Renan over on Twitter. Left tackle, 88%, 32nd. This is out of the total 58 qualifying potential players here. That's going to be for guard, excuse me. Right tackle, Evan Neal, 70.6% win rate, 59th of all the ranking tackles on the day. Bredesen, 90% was 32nd. Right guard Glowinski, 75.8%, 56th. And center John Michael Schmitz, 90.3. That was good for 18th. He was the best ranked offensive lineman in terms of win rate and ranking. Neal was 59th out of 60 qualifying tackles in week 1. Glowinski was 56 out of 58 qualifying guards. So go back just to Andrew Thomas there, 32nd. He's middle of the pack, not great, but certainly held up well enough. Had a little bit of a hamstring concern there as well that he battled through over the course of this game. It was brutal for Evan Neal. Talk with Coach Ed earlier in the week saying how you see the technique improvements. We believe he's going to go out and perform well. Him combined with Glowinski on this right side of the line was an absolute disaster. One-on-one beats around the edge, getting knifed in between as well, which comes down to communication, something that I pointed out here and talked about with Coach Ed and talked about on the episodes prior, and then reiterated again over on Twitter, which was reminding everybody that in camp, Evan Neal was asked if he had a preference of who played alongside him. He said it didn't matter. The focus was on doing his job. And I understood that sentiment. And I was okay with that because it's about scheme. And we're not going to talk about coaching today. We're going to save that for tomorrow when Andy and I are together and changes that could get made. And maybe we'll hear something from the Giants over the course of Monday and into Tuesday. But the idea that you have no preference of who's playing alongside you, and these are the two players that played alongside one another last year and looked the worst on week 1, that's a problem. And we will get into the coaching, but just from a player standpoint, they did not seem to have any awareness about what the other one was doing. There didn't seem to be any cohesion there. When Evan Neal's getting beat on his own around the outside, that is his problem. When you're talking about stunting to the right and then helping chip on the over the center position, potentially on the defensive tackles with your center, that's something Glowinski, there needs to be a communication there and understanding there about expectation. So this was a mess at the highest regard. Now, I'm going to keep tempering all this with the fact that if you lose by 1 point or you lose by 40, it still is just one loss. But this is supposed to be a cured offensive line. This is supposed to be a much improved offensive line. We know Andrew Thomas is there at left tackle. We know that Smith Jr. is a plug-and-play ready center, and it looks like he's going to be capable of that. Ben Bredesen earns the left guard starting role here. But rewind ourselves back into camp when he's getting shuffled around. And we talked about this, I think, on our preview episode saying, on our depth chart episode, which was midweek last week. If you're telling me that Bredesen was getting play at guard, at center, and at guard, at both guard positions, then it's telling me that there was a world where the Giants were optimistic that maybe Azudu would step up and claim a role, and maybe Glowinski would not be a starting guard on this offensive line. However, go back and watch the block field goal at the end of the opening drive. It is Azudu who lets a player, I forget who had the block there, go unabated, getting around the edge and providing that block that leads to the scoop and score. So there are problems across this line. You also had Matt Peart go down with a little bit of a cramp later in this game, some type of leg issue. He looked okay, I think. But remember, he's your backup swing tackle. There are no other options right now. Talked about again how maybe McCathan is a guy that they like and can come along and develop, yet he is not currently at this moment ready. Did not beat out a player like Matt Peart for the backup swing tackle role or any backup swing tackle role. Reminder that a player in Shane Lemieux was the backup guard center, not available in yesterday's game. The Giants have a world of concern here on this offensive line. They do not have other options right now. They will have to go to the free agency market. They will have to maybe go and look at the trade market potentially. But teams don't have, when teams have quality backups, they want to keep those quality backups. So the best that the Giants are going to be looking for here is potentially taking flyers on guys, possibilities, right? And remember, we know that down that practice squad, you have some other options potentially. Tyree Phillips was let go. We'll remind everybody here coming up in a minute who the other player was that they picked up and put on that practice squad. He's young. Does that mean that he should be getting a look here as well? We'll continue to dive in on not only what the problems were there up front, but the other masked issues potentially here for the Giants in this game. When we just think about going up against Dak Prescott and that offense, what did we see in the secondary? Maybe some things that we liked, but today really is, without saying sky falling territory, it's about looking at the myriad of issues that were presented in this opening game loss, 40-0 at home. The worst shutout loss in franchise history, maybe the worst loss in franchise history. And we'll highlight some more numbers that illustrate that point coming up here in a second. Okay, so we turn our attention over to the defensive side of the ball here for a minute and talk about some concerns there. But before we do, let's highlight from The Athletic. No team has ever lost 40-0 or worse, lost the sack battle 7-0 or worse, lost the turnover battle 3-0 or worse, had a blocked field goal return for a touchdown, or threw a pick six in the same season. The New York Football Giants accomplished that on opening night at MetLife Stadium, losing to the Dallas Cowboys 40-0. So historically bad numbers from the New York Football Giants. I do want to talk about Daniel Jones and just what we saw with him staying in the game late here and what that means or does not mean. And want to talk about the offense and some of the skill position players and what should or could have been done possibly differently in this game. But when we flip it over to the defensive side, this is something that I think we are going to talk about and look at as being easily forgotten, easily kind of glossed over here for the New York Football Giants. And why I bring that up is, remember, going into halftime, the Dallas Cowboys only had 75 passing yards. Listen, it was a mess out there. Dak Prescott's finishing line is 13 of 24, 143 yards, no touchdowns, no interceptions, a 72.7 QBR. You know, you didn't expect a lot. It's one of those games when you watch it on TV and you think, you know, how bad is it really? And then they show that camera angle, right? They show you the angle where you see it is downpouring torrentially with consistency in this game for the Giants and for the Cowboys. But the Cowboys didn't look inept. That first drive for the Giants looked like a team that had a sense of what they wanted to do. And then after that blocked field goal for the touchdown, they could never get back into that rhythm on the offensive side. Now, flip the script, though. As I said, Dak Prescott, not an overly impressive night for him statistically. Didn't need to be, by the way. Tony Pollard, and this includes also Dowdle, who came in as well with 6 carries for 24. Pollard had 14 for 70, 5-yard clip, 2 touchdowns in this game. So pretty consistent in that regard for him. You go down again. Remember the weather situation here. CeeDee Lamb, 4 for 77. Cooks just 2 for 22. Pollard, 2 for 12. Turpin, 2 for 11. There's nothing here that's overly exciting. Remember that you also had, by the way, I believe it was Ferguson who dropped a key pass that could have been over the middle. There was another one that happened over the middle as well. Things could have looked worse statistically. But, you know, Dak Prescott, for all of the bad weather, could have been someone who threw for 200-plus yards in this game. But one of my big concerns here is 0 sacks for the New York Football Giants. When we go down inside the defensive side of the ball here, and a lot of this stuff is at the back end of the game. Listen, Micah McFadden, he was flying around making some plays. Again, we'll talk about the positives here in a second. But Dexter Lawrence did have 2 QB hits. And I understand who Zach Martin is and what he is. But what is Dexter Lawrence? He's supposed to be a game wrecker for us. He was handled, and a lot of times consistently one-on-one overall. 4 total tackles, 1 solo. Kayvon Thibodeau, 4 total tackles, 1 solo. Did not have. He was one of my key players coming in this game to watch. Did not have the impact that I anticipated or that was obviously needed. Leonard Williams, 2 tackles, 1 solo. A'Shawn Robinson, 3 tackles, 1 solo. There was simply nothing defensively. The best play to point to was the tackle for a loss that came from late round draft pick Jordan Riley, who had his little moment that made you feel a little excited. 61 total tackles, 31 solos, only 2 tackles for a loss, They had 4 pass deflections, notable for Deontay Banks and for Xavier McKinney, who we will talk about, and only 3 QB hits in this game. This is the area that, for me, I think is being glossed over now in a very bad loss where the offensive line is problem number 1, 2, and 3. However, you can still make a play. And I first, as we were winding down towards halftime, I thought, well, listen, you're putting the defense, it's the same old story, right? Defense gets left out there for long periods of time. They can't catch their breath. And there's truth to that on the turnover situations. But remember, the time of possession for this game finished 26-32 to 33-28 in favor of the New York Football Giants. And it was 17-10 late in the second quarter there for the Giants. They were possessing the football, unable to have a tremendous amount of success, but the defense was not on the field for an insane amount of time. And they did not have an impact on this game early with any real level of consistency. The defensive front was not able to get pressure and push them off the line. Saw in the start of the third quarter, I think, highlighted it over. If you want to enjoy some live game coverage, last night was not a great example of it, but I am over on the PSF app where you can see me 7-8 times throughout the year, along with my co-host Dante Adams, potentially another special host coming on there as well. We were there watching it live. And in the third quarter, there was the brief moment where when you get a little bit of pressure, when you move Dak Prescott off the line, he ended up having a pass that went down the left sideline, the one where Deontay Banks came up a little bit lame afterwards. He was able to make the play because the ball had to be thrown a little bit sooner. It wasn't as deep down the field as it should have been, a little bit closer to the sideline, able to make an effective play. The very next play, same thing, had to kind of bail out on it, throw it down at the feet, I think, of Pollard coming across the middle of the field on a crossing route out of the backfield. Those were the things. I'm not even talking about sacks. I'm just talking about putting some pressure in the face of Dak Prescott and forcing the issue. This was a messy, messy game from a weather standpoint. And instead of being able to make the Dallas Cowboys, like they did to you, one-dimensional, you went ahead and afforded them the ability to be a fairly balanced team. Again, back to the box score. 24 passing attempts, 25 if you include the one from Cooper Rush. 30 rushing attempts. That's balanced football. The New York Football Giants, yes, they were also balanced with 30 pass attempts and 28 run attempts, but let's be realistic. They were waving the white flag all the way through the third and fourth quarter here. It was an unmitigated disaster. It was an unmitigated disaster. And defensively, I think you do have to look at it and just say, while we have the talent, we need to think about the execution. And again, we'll talk more about the coaching side of that tomorrow, but just at a high level, there's talent here. Now, I will take a very brief moment and note that when you are not saying someone's name, it usually means that they're having a decent game. Trey Hawkins had a nice big hit over the middle at one point. I thought he held up fine in coverage. I thought Deontay Banks held up well in coverage, had the pass deflections. I think one of the other issues that we can talk about is when you put Adoree Jackson, and he's going to follow the number one wide receiver, in this case it's CeeDee Lamb, you're going to follow him around the field. But because he is not a traditional nickel corner, he's not a guy that plays in the slot. You saw early in this game, the Dallas Cowboys used their tight ends. They used other wide receivers to go ahead and get Adoree Jackson out of the picture, getting lost in the wash, and create wide open spaces for CeeDee Lamb to work into and then be able to have a lot of that yards after the catch opportunity. So these are things that you take away. Again, the high-level stuff is about the offensive line, but I don't think we can come out of this game and say, well, the offensive line was so bad, that was the disaster here. There was a total lack of pressure, whether it's in the first two series, the first quarter, the first half of this game. The Giants were not getting home, were not putting pressure, were not being disruptive for the Dallas Cowboys offense, and that is something that flat out has to change if this team is going to be successful. Let's go ahead. Coming up next, take a look at Daniel Jones. What did we see in these very little glimmers? And that includes the bad passes, the interceptions, but also the decision to stay in the game. Who's responsible for that? And what does it mean for this Giants team going forward? We'll break it down here in a second. All right, a reminder that you can obviously follow me over on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht and also the show at One Giant Podcast at AndyMac214. Just support us over on YouTube and your podcast feeds. Always greatly appreciated. The last note for us here, obviously, is about Daniel Jones and staying in this game. I mentioned the 72.7 QBR for Dak Prescott, 8.4 for Daniel Jones, 15 of 28, 104 yards, 3.7 yards per attempt, 2 interceptions in this game as well. It really did for me, and Daniel Jones had 2 fumbles. Both were recovered here. This is a messy game. Isaiah Hodgins had the fumble after the nice catch over the middle, right? Like, I understand that this was a messy, sloppy game. So I'm not going to belabor the point on Daniel Jones. I'm actually going to give him a compliment here in a second. However, I'll just highlight the one bad play that can just be frustration based. And there's other bad plays too. But Daniel Jones, it was reminiscent of his rookie year. Gets pressure, we know that. Rolls out to the edge, we know that. Wants to make a play, and right before he goes out of bounds, just tries to zip one low to Darren Waller, and it gets picked off. In the scheme of problems in this game, again, it falls down the list. But you can't do it. Even out of frustration, you can't do it. As the franchise quarterback, you need to just keep trying to grind it out. And that's where I turn my attention to the back end of this game. A lot of it was, why is Daniel Jones still out there? Why are you risking getting your franchise guy hurt? I do really believe that as much as anything, that was a Daniel Jones, I'm going out there. And I don't often sometimes agree with the anecdotal stuff on broadcast, but Chris Collinsworth said it at the time that, again, what is it worth? Respect within the locker room. Yeah, this game is a disaster. Yeah, my offensive line is hanging me out to dry time after time after time. But I'm going to stay in here and try to find a way to maybe put a scoring drive together. Try to find a way to give us some semblance of, hey, this is as bad as this game could have gone, and we were able to accomplish this. Now, do I have a bit of a discrepancy when you start taking out starting offensive linemen and replacing them with backups, and then Daniel Jones is still there? Of course. And Matt Breida is in while Saquon Barkley is out? Of course. It is a weird, this is always the fun word, optic. But I think Daniel Jones was looking for something or anything to find success with. And it will be fascinating to hear. We'll break down what are the conversations after the post-game press conference, after the locker room stuff. What really do we go and look at? Because we're going to go in and dive into the tape a little bit more here and talk about where are the plays where the team was successful or not, or could have been successful, and then were not. Is it predicated on that offensive line on the right side? Is it predicated on bad blocking assignments anywhere across the line? Is it predicated on bad decision-making from Daniel Jones or not? All of these things fall into a, gosh, that was a disaster, let's wipe the slate clean and move on scenario. But I will highlight one thing that we will discuss tomorrow. And that is the coaching and how you try to adjust to this. The offensive line was a leaky, so there's no two ways about it. But another guy that was getting frustrated in this game was Paris Campbell. And I can appreciate it. Listen, Darren Waller had 3 catches for 36 yards in this game. That's basically it, man. Isaiah Hodgins, 1 for 24. Cager later in this game, 2 for 17. Darius Slayton later in this game, 3 for 15. There was no sign of the receiving game at all in this one. And unfortunately for Jalen Hyatt, he gets on the field, he has the target, an opportunity to make a splash play, and he drops it, right? And that's maybe just, that is the symbolic moment, right? Everything is going wrong. Here's a guy that's looked absolutely electric in camp. We believe in him. We know what his future can be. It's so bright. And then he drops the ball, which, and this is that highlight moment, was thrown behind him in bad weather, and the ball is wet and the line sucks. Okay, it's still a badly thrown ball. So there's so few things to take here and feel positive about. And Paris Campbell, who had 4 targets and just 1 catch for 2 yards, again, all of this falls underneath a sloppy, muddy, disgusting game. But when you play in that game, same field that the Cowboys played on, same conditions for Dak Prescott, same conditions for Tony Pollard, same conditions for CeeDee Lamb and for Gallup, right? Like, it's all the same conditions for their offensive line and their defensive line. And you come out with such a massive margin of contrast between these two teams. That's where the concern level lies. It's not about what was or was not successful or about what was bad. It's that just comparatively, if this thing had been played sun shining absolute pristine conditions, I don't know what the Giants offense would have accomplished. I don't know what the Giants defense would have accomplished. I don't know what the special teams would have accomplished. Would it have been 31-10? Maybe, right? Would it have been 45-7 because they could have scored more? It could have been 50 plus points for the Dallas Cowboys. And that's really the point here, is that the Giants afforded those opportunities. We understand the pick six. We understand and that's on tip ball going to Saquon Barkley, gets bounced up in the air as one of the interceptions. We understand the return for touchdown. Take those away. It's still 28-0, 29-0, the missed extra point. 29-0 in ugly, ugly conditions for both teams. That's really where it's hard for me to swallow. It's a hard pill to swallow. Remember, Tyrone Smith did not play. It was questionable for this game, coming in. Left guard Tyler Smith, hamstring, was doubtful going into Sunday. Couple of those players across their offensive line. So let's not sit here and act like this offensive line for the Dallas Cowboys was in perfect working condition. The Giants could not take advantage of some banged up, missing, and otherwise players across this offensive line. So that's where we're going to get into next. Tomorrow, we'll talk about what did not happen from a coaching perspective on the offensive line, on the offensive side of the ball, on the defensive line, on the defensive side of the ball, on special teams, and how you move on from this. We were not, I think I more typically come in with a, man, that's a bummer, let's move on kind of mentality around this stuff. But the reality is, I said going into this game, I had these conversations in a lot of Twitter spaces about how everyone was saying, you got to come out and get this win against Dallas. And believe me, we'll talk later in the week about the must-win nature of the Arizona Cardinal game. And I kept pushing back and saying, it depends on how the game goes, right? I can come out of a game against the Cowboys and lose and say, we went toe-to-toe with them. And I believe that we're going to go out and dominate the Arizona Cardinals, and we're going to beat the winnable teams, the beatable games, right, on the schedule throughout the season. I come out of this one, and Jordan Renan made this statement. Well, you're clearly not in the same class as Dallas coming into this season, which means you're not in the same class as the Philadelphia Eagles coming into this season. And now we'll get a real benchmark game against Arizona, who the Commanders just beat narrowly. But that's going to give you a sample of where do we stand right now early in the season. And the biggest concern is that some things are correctable through some coaching. The talent we feel like is there on the offensive line, the defensive line. We feel like when you look across it, that there are players that on paper either have proven to us on film or on paper should be talented. But you got to find a way to get it across the line here. So for all of the excitement of this season, for all of the what could be coming into this year, that is as deflating of a Giants game, especially a season opener, that I've watched in my life, that I've watched in my entire lifetime. And I'll close out at the end of the day here by noting one key stat that I came across going back looking through history for the New York Football Giants. Because following this game, I said that might be one of the 10 worst regular season losses in Giants franchise history. And somebody accurately said 10 worst might be number 3, number 2, number 1. Shutouts in Giants franchise history going all the way back to 1936 against the Lions, 38-0, 45-0 to the Eagles, 31-0 to the Steelers, 42-0 to the Raiders, 28-0 to the Cardinals. These are in the 70s, up into the 80s, and 95, 35-0 to the Dallas Cowboys at home. The only game listed here, shutout in Giants history at home, is that Dallas game. 34-0 to the Falcons in 2012. 38-0 to the Panthers in 2013, and 27-0 to the Philadelphia Eagles in 2014. This 40-0 home loss to the Dallas Cowboys is the worst, easily worst shutout in Giants franchise history loss, and also arguably the worst game, going back to the top and those stats that I highlighted there when we talk about how bad they were in this game relative to how bad teams have been over the course of an entire season. Absolutely brutal. Absolutely brutal. No excuses for it. And we'll see where this team goes from here. But it was a bummer. To quote the Big Lebowski, it's a bummer, man. And hopefully we see this team Get back into practice, get back into the film room, get back in looking at tape and improving. And we just need to see them get their foot back on even ground here when we look ahead to that Arizona game. You got to find a way to convince this fan base that as bad as that game was on Sunday Night Football, you can be better. As bad as that was, you can improve. Reminder that Andy and I gave our picks. We each pulled the helmets there for the Jets and the Bills game. We're on opposite sides of it. He has the Jets. I think I have the Bills. That might be reversed. We'll talk about that tomorrow, obviously. But there's no point in doing any of the fantasy stuff, the betting lines, all that stuff we might do in a little fun after an interesting game on Sunday Night Football. No. Bad game, bad loss. Team's got to be better. I'm Adam Armbrecht. You follow us over on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht, at One Giant Podcast, at AndyMac214 on YouTube, on the podcast feeds. Greatly support all of the views, the conversations, everything that you guys have done. And we'll be back in. We'll be back in trying to get over this one here on a Tuesday, most likely, talking about a coaching perspective, changes that we could see from Joe Schoen for this roster to improve it, and ultimately, where do we stand on what has been a very glowing honeymoon first year for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll? About as bad as the first foot back in your domicile. The honeymoon is now over, and it's time to get some results. We'll be back again next time, as Andrew Makowitz would say, were he here, talking all things New York Football Giants. And as always, let's go for better or worse. Big Blue.